I once came home 3 days early, only to hear my own son and his wife discussing how to transfer the assets while I was still breathing. They called it early inheritance planning. I called it the funeral of trust. That night, I didn't knock. I just stood on the porch, in the snow, listening to every word like nails sealing the coffin of respect. The next morning, I began drafting the blueprint of justice, not with ink, but with silence. Because sometimes the loudest revenge is when you say nothing at all. If you've ever been dismissed by your own family, pushed out of the house you built with your own hands, stay until the end of this story. Leave a single dot. If you believe justice doesn't need to shout, it only needs someone calm enough to wait for the light to expose the truth. And if you believe silence carries power, subscribe to this channel, because sometimes silence is the loudest verdict of all. I returned 3 days early, without telling anyone, not even Elaine. My flight from Amsterdam landed in Duluth, while the sky was still ink dark. Snow piled thick on the pines along Highway 61. I drove a rented pickup, the tires grinding against the ice like someone slowly sawing through wet wood. Lake Vermilion appeared in the distance, its surface hidden under mist, a few fishing boats flickering like fallen stars in the cold wind. I still thought that when I opened that old wooden door, Elaine would come to wrap a scarf around my neck, scolding me for not calling so she could make the onion soup I loved. I imagined that scene throughout the entire flight. The house sat on a south-facing slope, the one I had restored with my own hands 15 years ago. Stone walls, cedar roof, wide glass windows opening toward the lake. From afar it glowed in the snowy night, like the only living light in the forest. I turned off the engine, letting it cool while the warmth faded into the white air. I stood still, listening, the wind hissing past the railings, branches tapping against the roof, and music drifting from inside. A soft melody followed by laughter, warm but unfamiliar. I didn't recognize it. It wasn't Elaine's nor my son Daniel's. The way people laugh can tell you everything, whether it's love or possession. I set down my suitcase by the porch rail, then moved quietly along the wall toward the window spilling golden light. Inside, the living room glowed. A tall Christmas tree touched the ceiling, golden lights winding around it like veins of life. Beside the fireplace lay the amber Persian rug I'd bought in Isfahan, now buried under wine glasses, cheese plates, and the endless clinking of crystal. At the center, Daniel, my son, sat among the guests like a host. Next to him was his wife, Vivian, her wavy hair shining against a blue silk dress. Across from them were her parents, Robert and Marjorie Caldwell, faces I'd only glimpsed at a few holidays, now occupying the seat that once belonged to me. They toasted, their voices ringing through the room that once echoed only the wind. On the porch, Elaine sat alone. She wore a thick wool coat, her scarf slipping from her shoulders, her face caught in the glow from inside, eyes wet, hand holding a cup of cold tea. She looked like a porcelain figure misplaced in the noise. She listened but said nothing, present yet invisible. I stepped closer, careful not to let the boards creak. When I placed my hand on her shoulder, Elaine startled, then exhaled, tears falling again. "You're home," she whispered. I motioned for silence and sat beside her, feeling the cold air wrap around us. Elaine lowered her gaze. I heard her voice tremble through her breath. "They came 3 weeks ago, said they'd stay for Christmas. You were abroad. I didn't want to worry you. At first it was just talk, but soon they brought out papers. They said it was only to protect the family assets. I refused, but they wouldn't stop." She placed her trembling hand over mine. Her eyes carried sorrow, and I nodded slowly. No words were needed. She knew that nod. It meant not anger, but awakening from blind faith in family. Inside, the grandfather clock struck 6, its rhythm steady through the glass. The firelight reflected off Daniel's face. The son I once believed would inherit my craft, now mapping his future like a business deal. I saw myself in him, ambitious, driven, but I had never thought of taking what wasn't mine. The wind howled through the porch, swirling snow into the lamplight, glittering like silver dust. I stepped away from the glow, into the shadow of the stone pillar I'd built. From there I saw everything, the Christmas lights, the laughing faces, and my wife sitting silent in the snow. In restoration, to fix a crack, you must first understand how deep it runs. That night, between their laughter and the cold breath of winter, I saw the root of it. I reached into my coat pocket and felt the brass key engraved LHD, 40 years old, cold to the touch, but my hand grew warm around it. In my mind, I pictured the blueprint of this house. Every beam, every joint, every line of care. Anything can be restored if the builder has patience. And I knew, to fix what's rotted, you sometimes have to open it to the core. Elaine turned to me, whispering, "What will you do?" I looked through the window at the firelight flickering over familiar, yet distant faces. "I won't knock," I said quietly. "I want to hear them finish." She nodded faintly, tears drying on her cheeks. "I'll go upstairs," she murmured. "I can't bear to hear any more." She rose, walked down the side hall, and disappeared behind the door. Only I remained, with shadow and snow. I didn't leave that night. After the snow had buried the driveway, I stood beneath the old maple, watching the window light stretch across the snow like a faint golden wound. Voices and laughter continued inside, slower now, the kind of slow that comes when people finish toasting and start discussing profits. I had heard enough to know their intent, but not enough to see their method. And in my line of work, half understanding is more dangerous than ignorance. A lifetime of restoration taught me this. You can't fix rot by painting over it. You peel back every layer, trace the crack, see how deep it runs. Family works the same way. I had to see the full depth of the fracture to know whether it could be sealed or if the house itself should be abandoned. I eased open the back door leading to the kitchen. The lock was the same one I'd installed 2 years ago, mechanical, silent. Inside, the air carried the scent of wine, cinnamon, and orange peel. I switched on my pocket camera, the same one I used to record carved ceilings and broken beams on restoration sites, and slipped it into my breast pocket. The lens aimed through a narrow slit. Light from the living room shimmered through crystal glass, dancing like a swarm of red fireflies. I hid by the kitchen arch leading into the dining room, close enough to hear everything. Robert Caldwell stood with a glass in hand, his voice steady. "It's not about feelings, it's about timing. Victor's 68, Elaine's weaker. If we want to legalize the transfer, we act now, while they can still sign. Wait too long, and inheritance tax eats the rest." Daniel was silent, his hands clasped. I knew that gesture. It was mine decades ago when I lacked the courage to object. Vivian placed her hand on his knee, voice low but firm. "I told you, don't call it betrayal. It's a calculation. If we let them keep control, they'll sink together. This is our golden moment." Marjorie chuckled softly, pouring more wine. "Elaine's gentle, doesn't understand paperwork. Just say it's to protect from legal risks. Women hear risk and fold right away." Robert nodded. "She'll believe it. One draft signature is all we need. I have a lawyer ready to file. Asset protection transfer, conditional conveyance, effective immediately. Elaine's signature is the key." Vivian pulled a stack of papers from her bag, laying them flat. "I prepared everything. We'll get Mom's signature first. Leave Dad's blank. When he returns, we'll say it's just to secure the estate. He trusts legal language. He'll nod." Daniel sighed. "If Dad finds out, he'll be furious." Vivian sipped her wine, voice smooth as silk. "He won't. And if he does, once it's filed, he can't undo it. The law's on our side." Robert smirked, clinking glasses with his son-in-law. "Exactly. Once it's in the system, he can only accept it. No other heirs, no disputes. Easiest deal you'll ever make. My heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but from the rhythm of their words, each one a hammer striking the very table I had built. They were dissecting my home like a cheap asset, weighing it in percentages. Vivian leaned back, her whisper deliberate. Tomorrow I'll get Mom to sign, just one draft with her signature. We'll scan it and submit first. Dad's confirmation can wait. The system allows 10 days. It'll speed things up. Marjorie laughed, dry as paper. Clever girl, and Daniel, just sign where she points. They call this active inheritance. You should thank your wife. He's 68, Robert added coldly. Not many years left. Why wait? No one answered. Only the fire cracked softly, as if speaking for them. In the dark, I touched the camera's record button. Everything was captured. Voices, light, the confident faces of those plotting to take what I built. I looked up at the ceiling where I once burned a line in charcoal. For Elaine, the heart of this house. The golden light blurred the words through the haze of wine. In my mind, another blueprint began to form. Not to build another room, but to rebuild a boundary. I stepped back from the arch, closing the door quietly. Behind me, the clink of glasses mixed with the hush of falling snow. That Christmas Eve had no carols, no prayers, only the smell of wine, the drip of schemes through glass rims, and the slow, steady beat of my heart, like a hammer striking wood. A new blueprint had begun, the blueprint of justice, drawn in silence. I lingered a moment longer, listening to their final toast, then turned away. As I climbed the stairs, the house felt foreign, a structure I'd once restored but could no longer recall the wiring of. Upstairs, Elaine sat at the edge of the bed, clutching her scarf. The lamp cast her face pale. When I opened the door, she looked at me, not asking, not needing to. I sat beside her, holding her small hand. We have to go, I said, low but firm. Tonight. Staying, only, makes them stronger. She nodded faintly. Go where? In this snow? Back to where I once brought the past to life. Heritage Inn, I replied. At least there things still stand on real ground. She was silent for a moment, then stood, packing a few items into a canvas bag. No tears, no glance back. Only the sound of a zipper sliding shut on Christmas night, like a saw cutting through old timber, marking the start of a departure with no return. We left the house just as the grandfather clock in the living room struck 12. Outside, the snow fell so thick that the path vanished. I took Elaine's hand and guided her down the steps. The wind swept her silver hair back, tangling it with frost. No one inside noticed us leave. They were still around the table, laughing, toasting, and discussing the future of the Caldwell-Langford family. I opened the truck door and helped her in. The engine hummed softly, brushing the snow with a gray haze. Each gust hit the windshield like blades of cold air. Elaine said nothing, only tightened the scarf around her neck. I saw her shoulders tremble, not sure if from cold or fear. I wanted to say something to comfort her, but didn't. In moments like that, silence speaks the deepest language. The road to Heritage Inn was barely 15 miles, but that night it stretched like another lifetime. I had driven it hundreds of times, yet it had never felt so hollow. The pines along the road stood like pillars of an ancient temple, their shadows etched into the snow. Once in a while, the headlights caught the old wooden signs. Langford Construction. Restoration Division. That name had once been my pride. Now it reminded me that what you build can be the very thing your own blood tries to tear down. Heritage Inn appeared beyond a row of maples, its amber windows glowing against the snow. I had restored the place 10 years ago when it was just a crumbling shell of brick and mortar. Tonight, the site where I revived someone else's past became the refuge where I'd preserve my own present. I parked near the entrance. Elaine gripped my hand tightly. Are we doing the right thing? She asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. The right thing, I said at last. is sometimes just keeping people from watching you fall apart. Inside, the clerk recognized me. "Mr. Langford, it's been a while," he said, his tone faltering at our faces. I placed cash on the counter, cutting them off. No record, just one night. He nodded, handing me the key. Room 203, facing the lake. The room was unchanged, polished oak floors, walls hung with a landscape I'd once framed myself. A soft amber lamp glowed on the desk. Elaine exhaled, sitting by the window to watch the snow bury the road. She removed her gloves, rubbing her hands for warmth. "I'm afraid they'll notice," she whispered. "For 3 weeks, they've acted like the house already belongs to them. Vivian kept saying she needed to reorganize the space, meaning throw out your things. Then she said you should simplify ownership paperwork to make management easier. Every time I refused, they pretended to pity me. Daniel stayed quiet, only saying, 'I just want stability.' But his eyes, they weren't our sons anymore." She paused, her voice breaking. "The day you flew out, they moved in, said they'd watch the house. 2 days later, Vivian's parents arrived, claiming they wanted to help decorate for Christmas. Then, they changed all the storage locks, hired someone to catalog the furniture, and brought in a stranger calling himself a financial advisor. When I asked, Daniel said, 'Don't worry, Mom, it's just asset protection.' They put a packet in front of me labeled Asset Protection Transfer. I couldn't understand it, but I knew if I signed, nothing would be ours anymore. I refused. They looked at each other and changed tone. I sat beside her, listening. She wiped her tears. Vivian said, 'If you don't sign, you'll cause losses, taxes, insurance, management. You don't understand. Let us handle it.' Then her father cut in. 'Elaine, sometimes the elderly need to learn to let go.' I wanted to scream, but felt too small. I poured her hot tea from the porcelain pot, the scent of cinnamon and honey spreading gently. 'You did right,' I said softly. 'Refusing to sign means you kept the boundary. A house stands only when the builder doesn't sign its own demolition.' Elaine looked at me, tired but steadier. 'What will you do, Victor?' I took out my small brown leather notebook, the one I used for restoration sketches. Flipping to the last page, I wrote the first line. Project, Langford Estate, Restoration Blueprint. Elaine read it, frowning slightly. 'Justice has a blueprint.' I smiled. 'It does. Only instead of rulers and hammers, it needs truth and time. And like any restoration, before repair, you must preserve the evidence of the cracks. I recorded everything tonight.' Elaine froze. 'You recorded them?' 'Every word, every face,' I said. 'They expose themselves. Tomorrow I start redrawing the order of that house.' She stared, then touched the page where I'd written. 'Redraw? With what?' 'With silence,' I said, 'and with truth. Justice doesn't need noise, just precision.' Outside, the snow kept falling, burying the tire tracks we'd left on the slope. The lamplight traced 2 shadows on the wall, one upright, one leaning, as if the final lines of a blueprint were taking shape. I set the notebook on the table, gazing at the fogged window. 'Sleep,' I whispered. 'Tonight I'll sketch the blueprint of justice.' Elaine rested her head on my shoulder, her breathing steadying. I turned the page and began to draw from memory, each beam, each joist, each intruder hiding within the house I built. At the bottom of the page, I added a small line tilted toward the lamplight. Not every restoration is to restore beauty. Some exist to prove that wood can still defend itself from the worms. That night, inside Heritage Inn, amid the scent of oak and the whisper of wind, I knew our marriage was no longer just love. It was an alliance. And this time, justice would be redrawn by the hands of 2 who stood with the truth. Morning settled over Lake Vermilion in a pale white haze, the weak sunlight tracing a silver chalk line across the still water. I woke early, the chill clinging to the window frame of Heritage Inn. Elaine was still asleep, her face calm after a night of exhaustion. I sat by the desk and opened the brown leather notebook. The page where Langford Estate Restoration Blueprint still bore a faint, half-dried mark of ink. Drawing a breath, I took up my pen and added a new line. Phase 1, reclaim control. Phase 2, preserve the legacy. Around 10 a.m., I called Harold Whitman, the attorney who had worked with me for over 20 years, the man who had drafted every restoration and design copyright I'd ever signed. He recognized the gravity the moment he heard my voice. "Victor," he said over the phone, "you sound different. Where are you?" "At Heritage Inn," I replied. "I need you here. Today." 3 hours later, he arrived. The same brown wool coat, the gray striped scarf, the worn briefcase with the scuffed corners. He stepped inside, studied our faces, and said quietly, "This isn't small, is it?" I shook my head. "I need to rebuild everything, not with wood, but with paper." We sat in the hotel lounge, the dim light reflecting on the walnut table. I showed Harold the video I had recorded the night before. Through the clinking of glasses and Robert Caldwell's deliberate voice, every word was clear. When it ended, Harold leaned back and sighed. They really went that far? Using an asset protection transfer without legal authorization? That's deliberate fraud. Elaine sat still, her fingers intertwined. I said, "Last year, I gave Daniel limited power of attorney for small household accounts while I was abroad. They're using that as their lever." Harold nodded, eyes brightening. "Then the first step is revocation, immediate and notarized. We'll notify all banks, financial firms, and St. Louis County records." He opened his case and laid out the forms. I spoke while jotting notes. "Revoke POA, effective immediately. Register Langford, Lifetime Trust. Primary beneficiary, Elaine Langford. Amend will, estate divided 3 ways. Elaine retains lifetime use. After her passing, 80% to the Minnesota Arts Foundation, 20% to the Vermilion Preservation Fund." Harold half smiled, half frowned. "You're giving away quite a bit," I answered slowly. "What's built by hand should return to the community. People can betray, art cannot." Elaine turned, her voice faint. "Are you sure?" I took her hand. "Certain. If justice has a shape, it must stand firm like the roofs we built. No room for rot." That afternoon we moved to Heritage Studio, the old rear room where I had drawn the first plans for the estate. Amber light fell on the oak work table, still nicked from years ago. Harold spread the documents out, thick stacks of clauses and signatures. He examined each line. I read them aloud, clear and steady, making sure nothing could be misread. Langford Lifetime Trust, non-transferable, non-mortgageable, and immutable without signatures from both principal beneficiaries. Elaine signed first. Her hand trembled slightly, but the line was sure. I signed next, and Harold pressed the notary seal. The red ink bloomed across the page like the first stroke of paint on a bare wall. Then came the will. Harold placed the final sheet before me. "You're certain you're leaving nothing to Daniel?" I met his eyes. "If I leave him anything, I leave him as ingratitude. I can't pass that down." He nodded. "Then I'll note, any descendant proven to act in fraud or coercion toward the grantor shall forfeit inheritance rights in perpetuity." I signed. The pen felt heavy, as if closing a chapter by hand. Harold packed the files into his case. "I'll upload everything to Minnesota's e-recording system tonight. It's time-stamped, enough for notice and civil standby. Official record follows next business day." I stood and walked the narrow corridor back to Heritage Studio, the workshop I'd once used while restoring the hotel. On the east wall hung the old blueprint of Langford Estate, the oak frame darkened with age. I studied its fine lines, balanced, precise, unwavering. Under the warm desk lamp, its reflection on the glass seemed to ask, "Is the house protected now?" I nodded faintly, then signed the final duplicate. At that moment, the brass chime from the lobby clock echoed, 12 slow, steady strikes filling the air. Each one landed like a gavel on wood. I whispered to myself, "The verdict is signed." Harold looked over and smiled. And this time, you won't need a courtroom. I glanced at him, then at Elaine. The light from the lamp touched her face, warm as firelight. No, I said slowly. The only courtroom I need is the home we just saved. Outside, snow kept falling, but in that small room, amid the scent of wood and fresh ink, justice finally had a form, and it carried the fragrance of truth. Christmas Eve fell over Lake Vermilion with a silence thick as wool. Snow didn't fall in flakes, but in long white streaks beneath the porch light, and the north wind slid through the pines with the sound of coarse fabric being torn slowly. I sat in Heritage Studio, the brass-shaded lamp casting a warm circle over the old wooden desk. On the laptop screen, a message from Harold blinked to life. Just one line. Documents filed, timestamp 01:37 a.m. Beneath it sat the Minnesota e-recording confirmation, case number, file list, revocation of power of attorney, quitclaim deed into Langford Lifetime Trust, restated will, pour over. I read it once more, slow and steady, like a craftsman inspecting the final joint before raising the beam. Good, I murmured. The blueprint was signed, filed, and now had a legal skeleton of its own. I put on my coat and stepped out to the rear lot. Frost formed on the truck windows within minutes. It was 20 minutes to 2. Upstairs, Elaine's room light was dark. She slept at last after a day spent forcing calm. I told myself, the rest is execution, precise, clean, and lawful. On Christmas morning, the house on the slope was empty. By 6, Daniel and Vivian had taken their child to her parents' home in Ely for breakfast, plans Elaine had mentioned the day before. If there was ever a moment to act unseen, this was it. Harold had confirmed that at 1:37 a.m., he'd sent the notice of revocation and trespass warning to them. They hadn't read it yet. The St. Louis County Sheriff had texted, "Patrol car will swing by while you change locks to ensure procedure." When the locksmith crew arrived, snow still drifted softly. I handed them the new ownership certificate and the email revoking all prior authority, so no one mistook this for a dispute. Work proceeded in quiet order. Paperwork, witnesses, law, and attendance. 3 men came in a white van, tools neatly boxed. Jonas, the senior locksmith, tugged off his wool cap and gave a faint grin. "All of them, right?" "All," I said. "Front, side, wine cellar, garage. Every latch. And a new alarm system." I showed him the certified record the state had just logged. "I'll need a complete receipt. Date, time, serial numbers, text signatures for the file." Jonas understood. A man who'd worked 30 years doesn't ask why, only how precise. The work began. Power tools hummed dry and crisp, not loud. The old locks, chosen once for their charm, came out, replaced by steel bolt deadlocks, every code sealed in an envelope. Magnetic sensors fitted to the lakeside windows, motion detectors at the hall junctions, glass break sensors in the living room, a control panel tucked inside a wall cabinet, wires tidy as stitched thread. 2 outdoor cameras covered the front path and rear steps, a smaller one under the eave to record anyone touching the locks. The LTE transmitter linked directly to a 24-hour monitoring center. The privacy compliance form bore my signature and sat with the homeowner's file. Everything within law, no hidden cameras in private rooms, no audio beyond allowed range, enough to guard the property and record proof if anyone accidentally crossed the line. While they worked, I drafted an email. Subject: Notice of revocation and trespass warning. Recipients: Daniel Langford and Vivian Caldwell. CC Robert and Marjorie Caldwell. CC Harold Whitman, SK. The message, short and exact from Harold's template, stated, "All prior power of attorney rights granted to Daniel are revoked. All real and personal property of Langford Estate now belongs to the Langford Lifetime Trust, authority held solely by trustee, Victor, and successor trustee, Elaine. Cease any unauthorized occupancy or management within 24 hours. Return all keys, entry cards, and security codes. Any entry after notice constitutes trespass. The sheriff's office is aware and monitoring is active. All communications to proceed through counsel to avoid family conflict. I reviewed it once more, changing one word, reminder, to warning, then pressed send. The soft click of that key was enough. From that instant, the legal borders sealed like a perfect joint. At 3:12, the system beeped. Activation successful. Jonas handed me the folder. Lock serials, camera tests, photos, and a temporary passcode printed in ink. "Cold night," he said, glancing at the snow. "But it's done, Mr. Langford. This house, safer than before." I shook each man's hand, thanked them, and watched their taillights fade red into the dark. I stayed on the back porch, the stone wall warm from the fire inside. The silence was thick enough to hear snow crackle on the railing. My phone buzzed, an email from Harold right after mine. Received, filed in case log, forwarded notice to sheriff's office. They'll do a drive-by tonight. Get some sleep, Victor. I smiled, not from relief, but because every step had followed order. Far off, an engine's low hum, then a flicker of blue-red light rose above the frozen horizon. The patrol car glided along the lake shore, its lights flashing over the ice, stretching into trembling ribbons like the heartbeat of some sleeping giant. No siren, no noise, just the quiet greeting of justice to a house newly redrawn. I opened the door and stepped inside the living room, the same room that hours earlier had echoed with laughter from those who called themselves owners. The scent of cinnamon lingered, but the architecture had changed. Invisible diagonals of camera sightlines, the crisp click of locks bearing new authority. Passing the fireplace, I laid a hand on the stone, warm, solid, enduring, and remembered the words on the old blueprint, for Elaine, the heart of this house. Before leaving, I pinned a small notice just inside the door, as Harold had advised. Premises monitored and protected. Authorized access only. No need to place it outside for show. Justice doesn't need display, only presence. Driving back to Heritage Inn, I watched in the rearview mirror as the patrol lights skimmed the ice, scattering into red-blue streaks like a Morse code whisper. The line is drawn. Cross it, and you pay. I exhaled, not the metallic breath of anger anymore, but the steady calm of a craftsman after the final nail. Straight, deep, true. That Christmas night held no carols, no noisy blessings, only an email stamped A0137, locks fitting snug in new wood, a camera blinking once as snow drifted by. And I understood. Justice had arrived, not as an explosion, but as light reflected on ice, bright enough for anyone who still mistook their footing to realize they now stood on a line written in law. 6 o'clock Christmas morning. Snow covered the path, and the red-blue lights of the patrol car reflected on the lake like a strip of cold fire. I stood on the porch, file in hand, my long coat lifting in the wind. The police speaker rumbled, steady and low. "St. Louis County Sheriff's Office. Everyone inside, please step out." The door opened. Daniel appeared first, still in a robe, eyes heavy with sleep, followed by Vivian and her parents. Shock on their faces mixed with the flashing lights, turning the air a pale, fearful hue. The young officer approached. "Mr. Langford, we reviewed the papers. Current ownership is held by the Langford Lifetime Trust, listing Mrs. Elaine Langford as the lifetime beneficiary. Under your trespass complaint, we're authorized to ask them to leave." "Immediately." I nodded. "Do it by procedure." Daniel turned to me, voice cracking. "Dad, what are you doing?" "This is our house," I answered, each word falling like a stone on snow. "No, Daniel. This is the house of the one who built it and knew how to keep it. You only wanted to inherit early. Today I give you what you've truly earned, public shame." Vivian stepped forward, eyes burning. "You can't throw us out like this. It's humiliation." "No," I said slowly. It's justice. As Daniel looked back at me, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out and stared at the screen. One message, from Elaine Langford. The words glowed against the pale light. If you come home today and cannot step inside, remember, a house keeps no one. Only the heart keeps a home. If you wish to keep it, keep your heart first. He froze. The screen's glow revealed his face, pale, confused, ashamed. Every defense crumbled. No more shouting, just one line from his mother, short enough to read in seconds, heavy enough to haunt a lifetime. I stepped onto the porch, voice calm and firm. That was your mother's message. I'll add nothing. Today, justice speaks for us. Daniel lowered his head. The officers gestured. Vivian covered her face, turning away. Robert and Marjorie stood still, wordless. Patrol lights glinted off the Christmas tree. A red ornament slipped, shattered on the floor, shards scattering blue-red reflections across the frozen lake, like the slow heartbeat of justice, cold, steady, needing no voice. That morning, neighbors gathered to watch. Some filmed, others simply stood silent. Hours later, the clip spread online under the headline, Architect Evicts Influencer Family on Christmas Morning. I didn't read the comments. I just stood on the porch, watching the snow fall. Across the lake, the church lights shimmered through the white fog. In the freezing wind, I thought I heard someone repeat Elaine's words, not through a phone, but from the quietest corner of my own heart. The news spread faster than the winter wind across Minnesota. In just one night, the video of the architect who evicted his son's family on Christmas morning covered every local forum. The Star Tribune headline read, Cold-Blooded Father or Guardian of Justice. Morning TV shows opened with footage of the Lake Vermilion villa under snow, police lights still glinting off the wide glass windows. In the comment sections, the public split into two clear camps. One side called me a tyrant, a cruel man, someone who forgot that blood is blood. The other side wrote, if every father had the courage this man does, there would be fewer people mistaking generosity for entitlement. A professor from Duluth even wrote an op-ed. Sometimes justice within a family requires an act of symbolism, and no symbol is stronger than reclaiming your own house keys. My phone rang all morning. Harold Whitman called, his voice tinged with amusement. You're famous, Victor. The whole city is debating whether you're heartless or righteous. I answered simply, I don't care what they call me. I only know the house is back with its rightful owner. A local reporter called, asking for an interview. I agreed only to say one sentence before hanging up. I didn't evict my son. I reclaimed the house of respect. That afternoon, I drove back to Lake Vermilion. The sky hung heavy and gray, wind swirling through the old pines. Inside, Elaine was cleaning. She gathered the broken shards of the red ornament into a small fabric pouch, then opened a wooden box and took out a new glass globe, clear with one word engraved inside, truth. Where should we hang it? She asked. Same place, I said, where the light can find it first. Elaine climbed onto a chair and hooked the globe back to the center of the tree. The warm yellow lights shimmered through the glass, casting a faint glow on the ceiling. Small, but steadfast. She looked down and smiled softly. At first I was scared, but this morning, when I opened the door, the house didn't smell of liquor, no strangers' voices. It felt quiet again. It felt right. I looked at her without speaking. Outside, the lake was thinly iced, the sunset painting it a pale orange band. Inside me, something was melting too. Not anger, but the calm of someone who had finished what had to be done. That night, I sat alone in my study, staring at the Langford estate blueprint on the wall. Lines fine, straight, measured. I realized justice was just like that drawing. Not everyone understands its proportions. Some find it rigid, others beautiful. But to its builder, a single wrong line can bring the whole foundation down. Elaine entered and laid her hand on my shoulder. "What are people saying out there?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "Everything. But they'll forget. Only this house will remember." She sat beside me, eyes drifting toward the glowing tree. "I think that globe fits better than anything we ever hung before." I nodded. Because this year, Christmas isn't about giving gifts. It's about returning the truth. Outside, the wind swept snow into small spirals. Inside, the house was still clean, scented with pine and orange candles. I whispered to myself, "Some storms don't come to destroy. They come to sweep away what's rotten." And in the quiet light of the globe etched truth, I knew the humiliation of this morning had turned into purification. It was no longer an eviction, but a reconstruction of honesty, beginning with the foundation named Langford. 3 weeks after Christmas, the snow along Lake Vermilion's shore began to melt, but the echo of the Langford case still hung heavy across Minnesota media. The press had shifted tone, from curious to judgmental. A financial magazine called Daniel the son who miscalculated inheritance. YouTube channels dissected every second, podcasts analyzed every angle, and some even made animated reenactments of the Christmas morning scene for views. Daniel lost his job almost immediately. The Minneapolis architecture firm, where he worked as an associate, announced a temporary suspension of cooperation. His restaurant project contract by the lake was withdrawn, with a simple explanation: clients fear reputational risk. What they truly feared wasn't a legal scandal, it was embarrassment. Vivian, once active online, posted a 7-minute video titled, "I'm Sorry," from a misunderstood daughter-in-law. Her makeup was pale, her voice shaky. She cried midway through, spoke of family pressure and cruel media, ending with, "I just want forgiveness." The video reached over 2 million views in 2 days, but the comments were filled with laughing emojis. One read, "You're not crying for regret, you're crying for losing a $30 million house." By the 3rd day, Vivian deleted her account. Elaine received a cream envelope by mail, with Daniel's handwriting on it. Inside were a few lines. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't think things would go this far. I just wanted everything to be more organized. Please understand me." She finished reading, silent, then placed the letter on my desk. I looked at it, folded it, and didn't read it again. "You won't reply?" she asked. I shook my head. An apology isn't a key. Only action opens a door. I pulled a new design from the drawer. Not a house, but a workshop. Simple, single-story, low roof, wide glass windows facing the lake. Beneath the blueprint, I wrote, "Langford Workshop. Build with integrity." Elaine looked at me, eyes caught between surprise and understanding. "You're really doing this?" "Why not? They tried to turn this house into a symbol of taking. I'll turn it into a symbol of giving." 3 months later, we opened Langford Workshop, a woodworking and design center for underprivileged students from the Iron Range. Half the funding came from the Langford Lifetime Trust, the rest from the sale of my old firm shares. At the opening, I stood in the pine-scented hall and spoke briefly to the new students. "Here, you'll learn not just how to build things, but how to keep your promises with your own hands." One student asked, "Why call it a workshop instead of an academy?" I smiled. "Because justice, like carpentry, doesn't need a stage. It only needs a flat table and a straight saw." Elaine sat quietly in the front row. When the ceremony ended, she pinned a small fir branch to the window frame, tied with a red wool string. "To remember that Christmas," she said, "but this year it stands for beginning, not ending." That afternoon, light snow drifted down. Through the window, I saw students laughing, their hands dusted with sawdust, sunlight glinting on the fresh-cut boards. In that moment, I understood. Some debts aren't meant to be collected. They're meant to be transformed. Daniel had lost his reputation, but I didn't feel triumphant. Vivian vanished from the internet, but I felt no satisfaction. Peace came only with the steady sound of saws, the rhythm of honest work, the sound this house had forgotten for too long. Justice, in the end, isn't revenge. It's the ability to rebuild what was broken. And in the hum of planers over Lake Vermilion, I knew my revenge was complete. What remained was legacy. 1 year later, winter returned to Lake Vermilion, lighter but still all white. The house glowed every night, the sound of planers from the Langford workshop, pulsing steadily like the heartbeat of my new life. Everything had settled. The media no longer mentioned the Langford family. But one December afternoon, as the first snow began to fall, Elaine stepped into my study, holding a beige envelope. "Should you read this?" she asked softly. In the upper corner, I recognized the tilted handwriting, Vivian Caldwell. I glanced at the postmark, Chicago, 5 days ago. She placed it on the desk and left me alone with it. I opened the letter. Inside were 2 carefully folded sheets and a photo. "Mr. Langford, I'm not writing to justify myself. I lost everything. Daniel, family, reputation, money, and only when I had nothing left did I understand what it means to live. After it all, we divorced. Daniel moved into a rented apartment in Minneapolis near his old workshop. I heard he no longer works or speaks to anyone. As for me, I've been managing on my own. I work at a small antique shop outside Chicago, dusting, arranging shelves, keeping the books, carrying pieces out for customers. Every day I look at my cracked hands, and for the first time I know what earning a living means. I'm sorry. Not just for what I did to you and Mrs. Langford, but because I forgot that someone's home isn't a possession. It's a piece of memory they spent a lifetime building. I don't ask for forgiveness, only to say, I'm beginning to understand. Wishing you both a peaceful Christmas. Vivian." The photo showed her in a gray-blue uniform, hair tied up, wiping dust from an old clock. No filters, no flattering light, just hollow but honest eyes. I set the picture down and looked at it for a long while. Elaine returned and sat quietly across from me. "From her?" she asked. I nodded. "She says she's lost everything and finally knows what working means." Elaine sighed, her gaze sad but soft. "Sounds like a beginning." I folded the letter and placed it in the wooden box where I kept my old blueprints. "Maybe," I said slowly, "but every beginning must be paid for with truth." I looked at the photo again and murmured, "When she learns to wipe dust with her real hands, not filters, maybe she'll understand what value means." Elaine said nothing. Her eyes turned toward the lake, where snowflakes fell silently, melting as they touched the water. A gentle sorrow crossed her face. Not anger, but compassion for someone who finally learned, too late. I stood by the window, seeing our reflections in the glass. Elaine and I, now the only ones left in the house we almost lost. Outside, Lake Vermilion lay under a fine white blanket, and the pine by the porch still held the glass ornament etched with truth. I brushed my fingers along the wooden frame and whispered half to myself, "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just gives someone a chance to start again, at the edge of our lives." Elaine nodded softly, "And it lets us stay at peace." Outside, the wind stirred the chimes. Inside the warm house, light shimmered through the clear glass globe, and for the first time in a long while, I felt this winter wasn't cold anymore. 2 years later, spring arrived early in northern Minnesota. Lake Vermilion thawed by late March, its water shimmering silver under the sun. I had grown accustomed to the calm rhythm of life, brewing coffee each morning, opening the Langford workshop, teaching first-year students how to plane wood, read its grain, and, most importantly, listen to what the wood truly says. Justice, to me, was no longer punishment, but restoration, like repairing a cracked bridge so it could stand again. That afternoon, Elaine brought an envelope. "You have a visitor," she said, "and this time I think you should listen." I opened the door. Daniel stood on the porch. His face was thinner, his hair flecked with gray. He wore an old shirt, held his hat in his hands, and the pride once in his eyes was gone. "I'm sorry for coming without notice," he said softly. "I just wanted to see you. Once, if I could." We sat in the workshop amid the scent of cedar and the hum of planers. I didn't ask much. Daniel told me that after the divorce, he moved to Duluth and took a job with a small architecture firm specializing in restoring lakefront cabins. "I started over," he said. "No one knows who I am, and maybe that's better." I listened without comment. Sometimes silence is the first test. A week later, I called my old friend, Harold Whitman, chairman of Silver Pines Resort Design Group, and asked for a favor. "I want to test someone," I said, "not to punish him, but to see if he's learned his own lesson." Harold understood immediately. 2 days later, Daniel received an interview invitation from Silver Pines Resort, a major project, a lucrative contract. In the draft, Harold had inserted a faint clause at the bottom. 15% of design royalties shall be allocated to the financial advisory party under project consultancy terms. It looked reasonable, but in practice it meant Daniel, the lead designer, would have to surrender part of his pay to an unnamed investor with no accountability. I watched from afar. Daniel arrived on time, dressed neatly and calm. Harold later told me he read the contract to the very end, paused for a long time, then pushed it back. "I'm sorry," Daniel said clearly. "I can't sign this if it isn't transparent. I've seen contracts like this destroy a family. I won't repeat that mistake." Harold smiled, stood, and extended his hand. "You don't need to sign. The person who wanted to meet you is right behind that door." I stepped in. Sunlight flooded the room, reflecting off the lake through the wide windows. Daniel looked at me. "Stunned? Dad?" I didn't answer right away. I simply placed a clean contract before him. Blank, honest, with no hidden terms. "This is the real one," I said, "and you've just passed your own test." He stared at me, eyes brimming. "You were testing me?" I nodded slightly. "No. I was letting you redraw your blueprint. Last time you drew a wrong line. Today you fixed it with your own hands." Daniel bowed his head, his voice breaking. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to do right." I placed my hand on his shoulder and said quietly, "Justice doesn't hate, Daniel. It only asks each person to straighten the lines of their own life. You've done that." In that moment, I saw in his eyes, for the first time in years, the reflection of the architect I once taught. Balanced, patient, knowing when to hold and when to let go. Outside, the church bells of Duluth rang 3 long notes. I turned toward the window. Sunlight rippled on the lake, gleaming like the final pencil stroke completing Justice's design. I whispered, almost to myself, "You've corrected your own blueprint." No apology was needed, no embrace either. Only silence, the kind shared between 2 men who finally understood that redemption isn't spoken. It's drawn, one straight line at a time. 3 months after the meeting in Duluth, Lake Vermilion entered summer. The water was smooth as glass, reflecting the clear blue sky and the tall pines along the shore. The wooden house I had built with my own hands, once a place of fracture, had become a space for honest conversations. That afternoon, Elaine brought me a cup of tea and said softly, "Daniel's coming. He wants to see us again." I set down my pen. Outside, sunlight spread gold across the porch. I didn't ask why, only nodded. "It's time." The sound of a car stopped at the gate. Daniel stepped out, thinner, more mature, his face carrying not pride but the careful humility of someone who had fallen hard and was learning to stand again. He stopped at the steps, hesitant. Elaine opened the door and smiled gently. "Come in, son. This house was never locked. It was just waiting for someone to knock the right way." The 3 of us sat around the large wooden table. For a few minutes, no one spoke. I looked out at the lake, where the wind pushed soft ripples toward the shore. Some silences don't need to be filled, because in them lies everything that needs to be said. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice slow but steady. "If you had gone easy on me that day, I might never have learned how to stand up. I looked into my son's eyes and saw not calculation anymore, but the understanding of boundaries. And if I hadn't been firm, I replied, you'd never have the chance to bow your head. Elaine turned toward us, her eyes glistening but gentle. She whispered, we each learned our lesson, just had to pay for it with time. I nodded. Time isn't the enemy. It's the only inspector truth ever needs. The air grew lighter. Daniel exhaled as if releasing something heavy inside. I poured 3 glasses of wine. Candlelight flickered on the table, trembling slightly with the breeze off the lake. I raised my glass first, my voice low. To what was once broken but rebuilt, to those who dared to admit wrong and redraw their life's blueprint. Daniel lifted his glass too, eyes shimmering, to justice that can smile, and to family that knows how to return. Elaine's hand brushed mine, her eyes peaceful. Outside, Lake Vermilion shimmered under the sunset, the ripples glinting like pencil lines redrawn on an old design, the one called family. Forgiveness is not a gift given, it's a structure built by hand. And that night, in the candlelight reflecting over the water, I knew we had just finished its foundation. 5 years passed. Lake Vermilion remained the same, misty at dawn, bright at noon, and still at dusk. But one thing had changed. The house that once witnessed betrayal, division, and tears now echoed with laughter, the sound of planers and the lessons of young apprentices. On the land behind the old workshop, the Langford Foundation officially opened the Heritage Learning Center, a vocational school where students of engineering and young craftsmen learned not only restoration and preservation, but also professional ethics. Daniel was now the practical instructor, calm in demeanor, speaking little but working much. He taught his students how to follow the natural grain, how to place each joint so it would not crack, and above all, if your hand shakes, don't blame the wood. Fix the way you hold the chisel. On the porch, Elaine hung a newly painted wooden sign, the letters carved by hand, strong yet refined, Langford Heritage and Son, restoring structures, restoring character. Beneath it was a small emblem, an antique brass key engraved with the words, Justice lives here. When the morning light passed through the pines, it struck the sign and shimmered across my face. I stood there, watching it gleam like a lantern guiding through the fog. Elaine came beside me and smiled softly. You once said that to restore a house, you have to start from the foundation. I think ours finally has one. I nodded. Not just the house. The people in it too. Daniel stepped out from the workshop holding a toolbox, his shirt covered in sawdust. Seeing me, he stopped and said quietly, I think I'll keep this place for the next generation. You don't need to keep it, I replied. Just live right, and it will stand on its own. A soft wind swept through, carrying the scent of fresh pine and resin. The small bell on the porch chimed, blending with the sunlight filtering through the roof and scattering long golden streaks across the floor. Just like that morning years ago when I came home, but this time there was no shadow left. I took from my pocket the old brass key I had carried for 40 years. In the sunrise, the small engraving glowed clearly. Justice lives here. I set it on the shelf, just beneath the new sign. Elaine asked, You're not keeping it anymore? I smiled. No need. Justice doesn't belong in anyone's pocket. It lives in how we live, build, and repair. The 3 of us stood, watching the light stream through the rafters and dance across the wooden walls we had once raised with our hands. I spoke, low but steady, as if closing an entire chapter. Justice isn't thunder, it's the light that slips through the roof to guide those once lost back home. A breeze moved across the lake, stirring the flag before the center. The sunlight fell upon the words, Heritage Learning Center, and for the first time in years, I saw the house not as a symbol of pain, but as a place where light stayed to tell the story of renewal. And so we reached the end of the House of Light, a story of justice, forgiveness, and how one father chose to rebuild his home with light instead of anger. Thank you for staying until the very end of this journey. Every listen and every comment you leave is not only encouragement, but proof that justice and kindness still have a place in this noisy world. If you have ever been betrayed, if you have ever stayed silent because you believed truth would one day be heard, this story is for you. Leave a single dot. If you believe justice doesn't need to shout, it only needs to live rightly within each of us. Write the name of your city or where you're listening from, so I'll know how far the light of Vermilion has reached. And if you believe in stories where justice meets compassion and truth finds its way home, subscribe to join me on the next journeys. Because sometimes a story doesn't end with revenge, but with gratitude for those still brave enough to change.